I'd like to talk just a few minutes about triangles. I often use triangles as an example in a course I teach on two wonderful theologians and saints in the Catholic tradition called Augustine and Aquinas. And in that course, I focus a good deal on St. Augustine's Confessions, his famous autobiographical work. In there, Augustine, of course, is raised by a Christian mother, Monica, but yet he goes astray from the Christian faith for much of his youth, up until he's near 30 years of age. And he tries out different philosophical systems of thinking and all, but eventually he's able to sort of find his way back home to the Christian faith. But one instrumental piece of his journey back to the Christian faith is his discovery of the writings, he says, the books of the Platonists, he calls them. The books of the Platonists. What he has in mind here are the writings of some well-known Neoplatonists. Plato lived in the 4th century BC, and the Neoplatonist movement was a 3rd century AD movement. Augustine lived in the 4th to 5th century AD. And so the Neoplatonist movement was, maybe 500 years after the life of Plato. But there were a group of thinkers who had rediscovered Plato's writings or thought, and they had created a new synthesis of ideas. But they were very much inspired by certain important things that Plato talked about. One of the things that Plato and the Neoplatonists like to do, and then later Augustine would do this as well, is they like to use mathematical examples, especially taken from geometry, not so much in Augustine, but certainly in Plato. He liked to use examples taken from geometry. And the reason why is because the geometry and math in general is a mysterious activity of human beings. We're all capable of doing it. If you're listening to this, you're capable of doing at least some level of mathematical thinking and reasoning. But one of the questions that we rarely ask is, what are these objects that we're thinking about? What is a geometrical triangle, or what is a number? And they're not particularly easy to answer questions. I mean, it's easy to give a quick answer, but understanding the answer or understanding the history of these answers is not the easiest thing to do. Well, Plato thought that if you really think about geometrical objects, let's say, if you really think about geometrical objects, you will discover that they are not material objects at all. They're a different kind of object. Take, for example, a triangle. In geometry, a triangle is a figure, a three-sided figure that has three interior angles that is formed by the intersection of three lines. So you have three lines that cross each other, and the result of it is three interior angles that we call a triangle. Now, if you further ask the question, what is a line? Because a line is what triangles are made of. They're made up of intersecting lines. And if you ask what a line is, in geometry, a line is made up of a series of points. Now, if you ask what a point is, you will find out that a point is simply a location on a plane. It's not an entity. It's not like like some type of physical stuff. It's not like an atom or a quantum particle or a piece of sand. A point is simply a location. It has no extension, it has no width, it has no mass, it has no color, it has no motion. It has none of those things. It's simply a location on a plane. Since it has no physical attributes about it, the result is that it must be purely a mental object. It's something we think about in the mind. In fact, you can't take a geometrical triangle and put it into the material world, because as soon as you do, it loses the attributes of being a geometrical object. So when you draw a triangle on a board, or maybe cut one out of paper or wood or whatever, when you make a triangle, it ceases to be a geometrical triangle in the full sense of the word. Because now what you've got is a piece of paper that resembles a triangle, or a piece of wood that resembles a triangle, but it's not the full thing that a geometrical triangle is. And again, I refer you to the definition of what a point is and what a line is in order to see that that is true. So when we think about geometrical objects in the full sense of geometry, We are thinking about objects that don't have physical existence. They can't have physical existence because of the very nature of what they are. But yet we can think about them. We can not only think about them, but we discover things about them. For instance, you can easily find, if you don't know already, the proof that the interior angles of a triangle, if the triangle is on a flat surface, the interior angles of a triangle will always equal 180 degrees. So the sum total of the interior angles will be 180 degrees. It's always the case. We discover that to be true. I've had people question that before, and then that's at least one proof that I can show them. And once they see it, a light bulb seems to go on in their mind, and they say, "Ah, yes, I see that. The interior angles of a triangle do equal 180 degrees." And so it's fairly easy to see that that is the case. But why is it the case that we can know with certainty that a triangle, which is not even a material object, has to have certain properties or attributes? I think the reason why is because we are discovering the logical necessities of the object. In other words, there is in the mind a power of reason, or a power of logic, or a light, let's call it, that shines in the mind. The reason why I call it a light is because it resembles physical light. For instance, I can see things around me right now by way of the light that is shining in the room that I'm in. And so the light enables me to see it. The same thing happens, or at least an analogously similar thing happens when someone works a geometrical problem. The light of reason shines on the object, and we see the attributes of the object. We see what sort of thing it is, or what the attributes of it are, or what the properties of the object are. Like, for instance, the interior angles of a triangle equal half the degrees of a circle, or 180 degrees. So we see that by a kind of mental light in the mind. Now, that mental light in the mind has been an object of much conversation down through the centuries. You can go back to the ancient Pythagoreans, for instance, who were very fully enamored with the idea of mathematical order. What is the source of this light in the mind that enables us to see mathematical order? And then we even go back to the material world and discover that it seems to conform to mathematical principles. We can analyze the world in mathematical terms. We can come up with equations about how the world operates that actually work. And we can determine, at what angle to launch a spacecraft, or what angle at which, and we can work the math at how, at what slope something needs to go in order to get up to a certain speed or whatever. In other words, the world around us conforms to, or seems to function according to, mathematical laws. And there's a kind of logic that pervades the universe. And this caused people like Plato, it caused people like the ancient Stoics, and others, including St. Augustine, to conclude that the fact that in our mind there shines a light of reason that allows us to understand objects that have no material existence at all. And then we can take those insights that we have in geometry or in other mathematical disciplines, and we can return to the material world and discover that they work remarkably well, the insights of mathematical reasoning. Now, I know this is a complex subject, and there are lots of interesting books that are out there, lots of interesting reflection on this subject, and the understanding that I'm giving you here is certainly not the only one that is out there. But what I find fascinating about it is that it's a recurring issue to see mathematical reasoning as a window or an entryway or a kind of insight into human nature. It's one of the things we do that the other animals don't do. I haven't ever seen evidence that any other creature below human beings in this world has ever understood or appreciated the conclusion that the interior angles of a triangle equal 180 degrees. I don't think any other creature besides human beings that has lived on planet Earth has ever understood that truth. It's one of the things that defines us as being unique. And part of the meaning of the action of thinking mathematically is thinking about things that are distantly removed from matter, but yet they seem to have a very profound reality about them. And that's why we can objectively speak about what the properties of triangles are, circles or squares or so on. Once we know what they are, out of them issue forth certain necessary conclusions. These are fascinating things. There's been long conversations about this, and I encourage you to take a look at it. If that's true, if it's the case that mathematical reasoning is an entryway into a spiritual or immaterial realm, a question that will naturally present itself at some point or another is, what ultimately grounds or is the source of all rationality and order and reason, that shines into our minds, that conforms the material world to its principles and to its laws. And the conclusion that St. Augustine drew, and that I find very attractive, is that the ultimate source of mind, of logic, of reason, of the operations of the world in accordance with logical principles is none other than a supreme mind or supreme rationality, and we call that God.